Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the last panel session here today at the Nostos conference, the second annual Nostos conference here in beautiful Helsinki. And if everybody can please come inside and find your seats, that'd be great, because we are about to have another panel that is a continuation of a discussion we started last year in Oslo. Which is the panel focusing on aesthetics. And I have to say the panel last year was absolutely great. And the name of the panel this year is On Settling Together, Beauty and Civility Among Neighbours. And the moderator is no other than our former president and current editor-in-chief of the Fox magazine Phoenix, Mr. Håkon Teig. Welcome, Håkon.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're supposed to go.
Like a school class, you have to follow on.
All right. Am I on? Yeah, I am. All right. Welcome to the last panel of the Nostos conference on settling together, beauty and civility amongst neighbours. Nostos is, of course, the ancient Greek idea, known from the epic journey of Homer's Odyssey. 10 years described in 24 books. It's about the return home. Now that we are approaching the end of today's rather shorter journey, we'll speak about the much more difficult subject of how to actually build our homes and how we should live together, which is much harder than battling the beasts of Greek myth for 10 years straight. In line with the Scrutonian philosophy of the last year's conference, and building on the architectural panel, which Petter mentioned, which you should all actually rewatch. It is on, if you haven't watched it the first time, it's on New Directions YouTube channel. Do subscribe. We'll hear about the values of community in terms of civility and restraint. It's the connection Roger Scruton draws between how we treat each other in society and how we build. That is, good architecture seeks to be beautiful, but it also seeks to fit in, it seeks harmony, and it's not shouting or seeking all attention, with contempt for the street and the people who have to live there. Similarly, with traditional civility and how we treat one another in accordance with norms and customs, kindness and consideration, humility and respect. In that way, we can settle, build, and live together in community. Today's panel, starting with my friend closest here, Erik Norén, is an architect and vice chair at the Swedish Arkitekturopprøret, the Architectural Uprising. He is also director of Tradition Arkitekter, and working on classical construction. Professor Ferenc Hörscher is a political philosopher and philosopher of art. He's also the author of many books, all of them you should read, particularly his political philosophy of the European city. But I know him as a friend from the Conservative Philosophy Club. Marjo Uotila is the chair of INTPAU Finland, International Network for Traditional Building, Architecture and Urbanism. Uotila founded the Finnish branch of the same Arkitekturopprøret, Architectural Rebellion. And then we have Robert Kolek. Robert Kolek is senior architectural designer and project manager at Create Streets, working with local authorities on building codes. And he has an architectural degree from London Met University. All right. Give the panel a hand. Erik first.
So, first of all, thanks a lot for letting me speak. As a Swede,
It's always warm and welcome to visit Finland once in a while. And to some extent, coming home and feeling at home is where I want you to think of when it comes to what I'm saying here today. So I named my talk Symbols and the Value of Architectural Belonging, starting with a picture of a door. If you know what's behind this door, there's a great chance you're Nordic. And knowing this is an expression of what it means to be Nordic, as it says a lot about the values and symbolism in architecture in a culture. A simple door and its way and the way it's put together says a lot. For those of you who don't know, we're in Finland, and this is a door to a sauna. This door speaks to us. It tells us what's behind us. And if you're speaking, you have a language. Architecture is a language. And most of the cultures around us have rich and strong languages in built environment. Like here in Western Norway, these wooden charming cities with these horizontal panels protecting them from the rain. Something produced through 1,000 years of knowledge. The terraced brick houses of England to solve housing crisis during the Industrial Revolution. So extremely charming, they're actually the introduction scene of Harry Potter. The old Roman cobbled streets of southern Italy and the colorful color scheme of those streets. It's so clear. It's Italy. Or the Mediterranean city, all painted in white to protect from the warmth from the sun. This is something we all know. This is a language. It tells us where it is. It tells us how it is and who is for. It's clear to say that it's a church, a mosque, a house, a store, an office building. It speaks to us. And it's really, really important for us to know this language, because being able to understand how our built environments are intended to be used prevents us from destroying and misusing them. Therefore, understanding this language arms us with the knowledge that, in the end, can lead us to make better decisions concerning culture, heritage, cities, ecology, and sustainability. So this is a language. This speaks to us. Then what is this? What does it say? For whom is it? What is it? Where is it? I know, I made this presentation. This is in Paris. Who could know? Because this doesn't speak to us. And in truth, this is about our homes, who we are, and how we want to live. And I believe this is about who we want to be as a people, how we build our homes and our common spaces, and what we leave behind for those who come after us. And it's up to us, and it's our responsibility to care and fight for these questions and not fall for the modernist and globalist dogmas about architecture without beauty, without any sense of place, and without any place for humans. Thank you. So just like a spoken language, it should be a right for everyone and every nation and any community to express their own languages in architecture. And we should allow the community to develop express their own styles and protect and preserve the cultural heritage they already have in the built environments, and not let it be threatened by globalist ideas like modernism. Everything doesn't have to look the same everywhere. So local architecture, it's telling you when you're home, when you've done your Nostos. You may feel home around the family and your friends, but your home is also a physical space. It's a built environment. So if you remove architecture from a city or from a village, you're left with a group of people and some roads. That's it. When you remove architecture, there's only people and roads left. So the architecture of a place is the receipt of the culture and the people living there for generations. Therefore, what we build says a lot about who we are and what we leave behind for our next generations. So that will be our story. That will tell our story. So therefore, we must fight and make sure that what we leave behind will be the greatest of gifts to our grandchildren. So experience passed down over generations is to some extent the definition of culture. I will not talk about architectural symbols. You all know about the Eurovision Song Contest, right? This is here in Helsinki. Those beautifully made stone men are just outside the railroad station in Helsinki. Largest city, capital city, largest railway station in Finland. So if you want to make a statement, if you want to support your artist competing for Finland, you do this. How come? Because those stone statues are imprinted in the minds of Finns. It's a symbol of Finland. It's the symbol of people who pass by this very, very, very busy train station. It means something to them. It's a symbol. It's something for them to gather around. When you want to say something, the condolences of a whole country could be shown with one building. Just has to be the right one. We need these kinds of symbols to gather around. This is who we are. It reflects us. It makes us gather. The reason this photographer took this picture is because this motive means something. Brandenburger Tor is a symbol of Germany. The colors of the Ukrainian flag on that says something. And the reason the protest was held at that place is because that place means something to these people. It's important for them. It's their democratic squares, like the Romans used to collect themselves at the Forum, Germans do at the Brandenburger Tor. Same thing in Norway. The Rose Sea, after the terror attacks in Utøya, resulted in a square covered in flowers. The Norwegian people didn't really know where to go when this tragedy struck them. So they went to this church square. There are several churches in Oslo. How come this one? Because it means something to them. It's a symbol for their culture. It's a symbol for their natural heritage. It's something where they could gather as a group. It's important to their culture. Architecture is important to their culture. We have to fight for these spaces. And we have to be very, very cautious and careful when we build new things to make sure that the next generation will have similar things and not destroy the ones we already have. I'll tell you about a famous quote by an even more famous person. Do you recognize this room? It might be easier with people. This is the House of Commons in the Parliament building in London. This is where Britain as a country used to be ruled from. It still is. It's a very important room. This is how this room looked during the war. This is this very famous man, Winston Churchill, in the ruins in the Houses of Parliament in the destroyed parliamentary room. There was a discussion after the war on how to rebuild this room. It was very lively as a debate. They were discussing either to rebuild it exactly how it was, or go for a more European semicircle parliamentary room. And Winston Churchill said that this room can be and is, to some extent, the result of the two-party system in Britain. The way this room works, the way this architecture makes us move, talk, and look as people, as politicians, as representatives of the people, is important. And it has always been. So if we change this, we change Britain. So he said, we shape our buildings, and thereafter our buildings shape us. Very famous quote, and now you know the story behind it. So what's my call then? What's my point? What do I want you to understand from this? First of all, architecture affects us. Architecture affects us, and it says something about who we are. It reflects us. To some extent, it's the receipt of our civilization. There's value in belonging. The local value in feeling like belonging somewhere. And architecture can help with that. Local and traditional architecture can create identity and belonging, while modernism often does the opposite. It's rootless. It belongs nowhere. It's equally wrong wherever it is. It's international. And we have to care. We must care for our surroundings, and we have to strive for beauty and respect within our communities. This to give ourselves, as human beings, a setting of harmony in the places where we live our lives together. So I'll end with another quote. Tradition is a set of solutions for which we have forgotten the problems. Throw away the solution and you get the problem back. Kiitos. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a great pleasure to be here again. again, meaning that last year I was invited to Oslo and this year here. I am from Budapest, Hungary, a country which claims to be a relative of Finland, of the Finnish people. So I wonder if that's true or not, but we claim it, and that makes it a real relationship, a friendship, which I hope will help the discussion. I present today something on which I was working for some time, which was this book about our great friend, the late Sir Roger Scruton. This book is concerning his work on art and politics and the relationship between these two fields. And the man looked like that, and his environment looked like that. That's his study, and you note the books behind him. It's something that is out of fashion nowadays, that you have books in your rooms, but that's the way that he did it. And you also know the pianos, the music instruments that he used for enjoyment and for contemplation as well. And this is, again, Roger Scruton, quite close to the other one, because this is his country estate or cottage, and he, the country gentleman, enjoying the life of a farmer, in fact, with his family. And I think that two things together tells you a lot about this author. A man of studies, of education, of culture, and a man of cultivating the land and cultivating friendship in a local community in rural Wiltshire. And let me, the third one, the last, one of the last scenarios where he presented himself. It's the local church. Well, not really local. He had to travel a little bit because that's an Anglican chapel where the traditional way of praying was still in practice, and that's where he was playing the organ. So this is the person that I want to deal with, but of course concentrating on architecture. And he has got two books which I would call your attention to. One is on the aesthetics of architecture from 1979. And another one, a collection of essays, The Classical Vernacular, which is from the mid-90s. And in my book, I try to explain the context of those books, starting out with his friendship with an older colleague, David Watkin, an art historian in Cambridge, in Peterhouse, Cambridge, and also the way that he arrived to a theoretical account of architecture, which is the first book. And the second one is a more relaxed and more elaborated version of his theories of architecture. And his final years were spent around regulating urban communities and the architectural regulations in Britain, actually, in this commission, Building Better, Building Beautiful. That's the last phase of his public career and a very important moment in his life, in his final years. But today I will concentrate on a single issue, which I called, following his directions, the art of the appropriate. And to show what he means by it, I choose this little interior of a chapel, the Pazzi Chapel in Florence, by Brunelleschi. And I would like to concentrate on this single corner in the back of that chapel. If you look at that, it presents you with a major problem of architecture, how to solve the problem of the corner. It sounds somewhat strange that it can be a problem, but it is a problem. And it is a problem that was already discussed by Wittgenstein in his lectures on aesthetics, when he described the work of the builder, the designer, but even more the builder, who wants to find the right place for a door in a wall. And that's how he describes the process. You design a door and look at it and say, higher, higher, higher. Oh, all right. And you make a gesture because you are relieved. You found the right place. And Wittgenstein tries to understand what is happening in this process, during this process. And let's see how Roger Scruton describes the same thing, how an architect struggles with solving this problem. According to him, the problem is this. There are two pilasters on the two sides of the corner, on the two endings of the walls that meet in the corner, and you have to make a decision what to do with those two pilasters. And of course, you had the earlier solution by Sangallo, who shows that in fact you can disregard the problem and put the two pilasters side by side. But then, according to Scruton, there is a better solution, and this is the better solution. When one of the pilasters get buried into the other wall. Why? Because then the two of them will not compete with each other. There will be a natural order between the two, and that makes the design better. You have to judge it for yourself. This was Sangallo's solution, and this one is Brunelleschi's. And to make that decision, you have to rely on your own aesthetic judgment. And that's the crucial thing, according to Roger Scruton. You have to be able to make your own aesthetic judgment. Which solution is better? The one where the two pilasters are side by side, they are much wider and it makes the whole structure stronger and more powerful, or you want a more elegant and more lighter version, which is Brunelleschi's one. And what does it suggest us about architecture? It suggests us that architecture is about the details. It's not about the grand scenarios. It's about the small, minor details, about what is to be done with a small detail, how to put together the small details into a whole. You build it up part by part, and you try to find the right place for every little detail. And that's the art of the appropriate. What you do is to find the appropriate place for each and every little piece, and you find the connection between them. And the appropriate place is the one when the relation which enables us to see the existence of one part as providing a reason for the existence of another. So all the little parts find their place, and they will explain each other, and they will build up the building. That's what is the achievement of the Renaissance, and in particular of Alberti, who was both an architect and a theoretician. And that's important for Scruton, who was himself a theoretician of art, but also a practitioner of art. And this is a subject matter which needs to be practiced. You can teach it, but your teaching will do nothing if you don't have your own personal experience of it. The two go hand in hand. You have to practice it if you want to teach it. It's like all human activities. If you want to teach it properly, you have to be able to do it. Otherwise, you will not teach it the right way. And that is already a claim about human nature as such. And this is where our problem widens up. What is the claim that is made here about human nature? It is a claim that the human being is a person who is defined by relationships. It's not an atomic particle in the universe. It's something that is related to others. And in these relationships, this being will find the reasons for its own existence, the meaning of its own existence. In these relationships, the human being will find his or her place, her and his home. That's what is meant philosophically by the term of homecoming, to find the meaning of your life. And in architecture, it's the same thing as in politics, as in everyday morality, and in all practical activities of the human being. We have to be able to make sense of our activity. You have to be aware why you are here. I have to be aware what I want to tell you, and the two of us have to be able to interact, to exchange our views on that. And that's what we are going to do if I end it on time. So I try to do so, and that's why I have to skip some of the slides as a gesture towards the others, and rather try to finish up beside pointing out that Roger Scruton had, of course, an earlier forerunner who pointed out this relationship between subject and object, between me and the other, and that is, of course, David Hume. And you see David Hume in front of this piano, and I like the parallel of the two. But that's not the point that I have to make as a final point, but rather to point out that the sort of aesthetic judgment that we were talking about, and the sort of attributing meaning to those judgments, is something that you cannot give the principles of. There are no overall theories for that. There are no rules of taste. Taste is something that you have to practice, and you learn by practice. And that's true about your own work, and it's true about the human being as a practical actor in his or her own life. And finally, let me also use this occasion to try to refer to my present work and an opportunity where we can discuss your own ones. My present project is on the concept of civility, which is based on this idea of the philosophical concept of the person, i.e. that we are defined by our relationships, by our tasteful manners, by our practical wisdom, and that's the concept of civility that I will work on. And the claim is that culture is upstream from politics. That's I kill actually my work, because now I told you the message that I want to bring out, but that's because it might help to make the two claims that I will finish on. One is that I think that this discussion today showed us that Roger Scruton and his work, his philosophical legacy, can work as a lingua franca of the renaissance of conservatism. And I think that's something that we all agreed on, because we kept referring to him as a common reservoir of knowledge. And this Scrutonian legacy, the lingua franca of conservative renaissance, can be called, I claim, classical conservatism, or for a longer term, classical common sense conservatism. And we are going to discuss all of that at this event, the Budapest Scruton Seminar, which is going to happen in the last week of June. And as Emma did with the Common Sense Society's meeting, Caledonia Fellowship, the Budapest Scruton Seminar is still open for you if you are interested in addressing these issues together in a friendly community. So thanks for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, the microphone is working. Perfect. While we're waiting for my fabulous slides, I have 2 points to make. One regarding Sir Roger Scruton. For anyone here who would be interested in hearing what Sir Roger Scruton has to say about beauty in architecture, I strongly recommend the video essay he made for BBC a couple of years ago, and it's called Why Beauty Matters. So if you ever wonder, or if you ever have to explain to anyone why beauty in architecture and built environment matters, that's the perfect source for it. It's been a source of inspiration for me on my path towards beautiful architecture. And one other thing that occurred to me when I'm very honored to be here, I'm very honored to be invited in this esteemed conference and to this esteemed panel. But about this place where we are now, I don't know if this was chosen on purpose by the organizers of this conference, but this is the very location where Eliel Saarinen, our most famous architect, Finnish architect, designed Kalevala House in the 1920s. It was never built, but you can look up Kalevala House and you will find out all the various things that happened on the way of trying to build this fabulous house for Finnish culture, Finnish history, Finnish research on that time. But this wasn't at all what I was going to talk about and what I was invited to talk about. But I was invited to talk about my work as the founder of Arkkitehtuurikapina. That's, if you are not familiar with Arkkitehtuurikapina, just Google it, join it, and be part of the people's movement towards better, more beautiful built environments. And Arkkitehtuurikapina is the Finnish sibling of the Architectural Uprising group, already operating in all the Nordic countries where it started, and also outside the Nordics. So it's growing, I think, more than 100,000 members in different social media platforms. So join us. I'm also the founder and chair of INTBAU activities in Finland. That's also striving for similar goals. But unlike Arkkitehtuurikapina, which is a people's movement, grassroots movement, for ordinary people's movement, wishing to have a better, more beautiful built environment, INTBAU is operating in 40 countries. And it's basically a group of professional people, professional architects, designing new classical, new traditional architecture. So that's the difference, but the goals are the same. Further, I'm currently also the chair of the Urban Development Committee in my hometown, Kaarina, which is located next to Turku, if anyone is interested. So I had my personal enlightenment, and that was in 2015, when I recognized that we were told many, many lies, many fallacies. I will talk more about the fallacies everybody knows in a minute. But I was really, really frustrated. I didn't know what to do. So I I just thought, well, I have to do something, and that's why I founded Arkkitehtuurikapina. I had never been active in social media. I had never thought of becoming an activist or nothing of the sort, but I had to do something. Further, my background is in research, in sociology, so obviously I tried to find as much information, research, studies that I could possibly find. And also, I thought that it would be a good idea to write in Finnish language about what the research says in different languages already, and what kind of beautiful environments, beautiful new buildings are possible in other countries, but not here in Finland. And also I felt the need to influence policies and legislation, so that's why I went into politics. And why is it important now? I have learned to know so many people that have been promoting, working for better, more beautiful human environments for decades. But why is architectural uprising, arkkitehtuurikapina, arkkitehtuuruproret, the thing that is making the change right now? And my claim is that with all the drawbacks, it's because of social media. So with social media, our message can be reached by so many more people, and we can join forces and we can form networks unlike before. Also, this is my guiding line. I think that urban infill, new buildings, especially in historic neighborhoods, should strive for adding beauty and harmony instead of ugliness and contrast. And like in the previous speaker slides, this is exactly what's happening. There is more ugliness and contrast, and we should not let that happen. We should strive for the opposite. Well, I'm not going to dive into the multitude of research available, but if you connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, you will find my writings and references to so many different research articles from environmental psychology to surveys to any other humanist research field backing the same thing. Backing what kind of buildings and environments people share this idea of beauty. This is just one example. People who are from Finland, you might remember this case. The rendering on the right is the building that will be built in Tampere, Finland. It is currently being built, but at the time of this competition, this voting, it was just a rendering. And a young architecture student called Veeti Heikura from Tampere, he made the design on the left-hand side. It was a counter-proposal, and Aamulehti, which is the local newspaper in Tampere, arranged this competition among their readers about which one of these buildings the people living in Tampere would like to see built in that particular very central location in Tampere. And well, now you don't have to guess what happened. So my only question is, who are those 4.5% people voting for the right-hand side? So this is a no-brainer. Most people prefer similar kinds of features in built environments. Then there's this case of sustainability. We hear a lot about sustainability, and there's also a lot of greenwash going on, especially in the modernist architecture circles, claiming whatever seems to be sustainable. But in fact, what is genuinely, by definition, sustainable architecture, that would be the one based on traditional and classical ideals. With design principles such as sensitivity to context, human scale, local materials, reducing environmental impact of building, craftsmanship, symmetry, proportions, subdivisions, and ornamentation. All very, very common in traditional architecture. Then I thought maybe I would entertain you a little bit, because it's quite late in the afternoon. I'm not going to sing, don't worry. I could. I'll save it to the later evening. That wasn't a promise. Well, the fallacies, I find this a very interesting thing, because you are about to hear and see a couple of very, very common fallacies, very, very common sayings or truths that are not questioned. And I think that we should really start harshly questioning them. They are in no particular order, just random order. And there are more fallacies. This is just to give you an idea of what's going on. So you all hear that, of course, we would like to build more beautiful houses, but we can't because it's so expensive. I've started to ask for Excel sheets every time I hear this claim, and nobody has ever produced any Excel sheets proving this point. And what's even worse, or better, there's a recent study from the Royal Institute of Technology from Stockholm saying, it's actually from the architecture department, by the way. And the outcome says it is most definitely not more expensive to build more beautiful than to build more ugly. So it's a no-brainer as well. And people living in Finland might recognize this photo. It's a brand new hospital complex in Jyväskylä, Finland. Black as black can be. Why are we having this sort of hospitals? Are we thinking that people will get better seeing these monstrosities in black? And also, this is not a cheap building. The ugly buildings are not cheap. They are very expensive. Well, another thing, you have all heard also that, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So, which basically means that it doesn't really matter what kind of buildings or built environments we'll have. Everybody has a different opinion. Somebody likes merihaka. Well, somebody likes merihaka, that's for sure. For those who don't know what merihaka is a housing complex in Helsinki, very, very brutalist. But the fact that there are some people preferring merihaka against Huvilakatu, it doesn't mean that everybody has a different opinion. It just means that some people prefer modernist buildings and some don't. And the majority of people preferring non-modernist buildings, that's the majority of people. And that's what we should listen to. Further, what we also hear very often, that buildings should not copy the past. Buildings should be modern. Buildings should be reflecting our age, not some history or some past. But you know what? We have accepted that buildings copy the past in massive scale, in industrial scale, and nobody says anything about that. So my question is, what's the difference between copying and copying? I don't see the difference. It's just an ideological difference. Something should not be copied, but something is allowed to be copied in mass industrial scale. These photos are, by the way, new buildings, new residential areas, mainly from Nordic countries. Helsinki, Copenhagen, Stockholm, I think Göteborg, maybe Oslo. And there was a recent, if you want to look up the Guardian, there was a long article some time ago in the Guardian newspaper where the journalist had visited these different cities, trying to find something that is genuine, something that is reflecting the cultures in these countries and cities. Well, they are not reflecting any of our culture. It's just what Eric was describing, the international modernism, or whatever it should be called. I don't know. Further, buildings should reflect their own time. But my question is, whatever is being built today, it always reflects our time. So who has invented this concept that our time should be reflected by the monstrous ugliness that anyone can come up with? I think that we should strive for changing that. These are, by the way, modern healthcare buildings. The one on the left-hand side is from Finland. I forgot which city because it has no reflection of the city or Finland. It could be, the only reason I remember it's from Finland is because I wrote it there. Without that information, I wouldn't even know if it's from Finland or, I don't know, from Sweden or somewhere else. But there are possibilities to build continuing the traditions, like, for instance, the healthcare building, healthcare facility on the right-hand side. That's from Denmark. And also, I'm really fed up with this. So there are so many times I keep hearing, and you keep hearing, that it's a good idea to have contrast between old and new. To strive for contrast, that's good. Well, look at the building. Look at the photo. Is it really a good idea? Does it really reflect something positive from our culture or from our time or age? So this is actually just creating more chaos. If you think of it, if you always try to add more contrast to anything that you're building, you are most definitely creating more chaos. Is that a good thing? I don't think so. And this is, I think this is my final fallacy slide, and then I'm reaching the final slides of my presentation. I think that we have had, during the past years, many past years, unquestioned objectives of building to add density and to add height. But my question is, what is at the end of this story? If you always only try to add more density and more height, and don't care about any of the human aspects of built environments, you will definitely create dystopia. And we are creating dystopia ourselves, and we should stop. Well, I have one very good example, by the way. Somebody was mentioning Rauma. People in Finland know Rauma and Old Rauma, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, by the way. This is from Old Rauma. This photograph is from late 60s at the heart of UNESCO World Heritage. And I'm quite sure I don't have to ask which part of the photo does not fit in. And it was even called the sugar cube. And I still don't understand why it was a good idea to build such a 1960s typical sugar cube at the heart of UNESCO World Heritage Site. But sometimes miracles happen. This is the same site. This is new urban infill blending in, and it should be blending in. So the owners of the site, and this actually has been done at the end of 1980s. So this wasn't done recently. It's quite some time ago. But anyone walking past this building or the UNESCO World Heritage Site in Rauma now would just think, well, this is a very well preserved old building that should be there as it is. And this is, I think, a very good guiding line for all urban infill. Not contrast, but blending in. But still, typically, that was not mainstream. This is mainstream. And I think that we should just stop this kind of mainstream and change the way new buildings are built, especially next to old ones. The ones that know about Helsinki, this is from the name of the street. It's a very, very short street. It's called Punanotkon katu 2, Punanotkon katu 2, if anyone is interested, just to go and see. But there's this very famous new Renaissance building on the right-hand side. And what was next to it from the 60s until 2000 something, there was this monstrous headquarters of Valmet, I think, and also headquarters of Finnish police at some time, that was demolished. And that would have been a perfect opportunity to create something nicer, something friendlier, something more polite next door to the Ohrana house, by the way. Finns know about the Ohrana house. That's the new Renaissance house there. But no, we had this fairly similar copy pastiche of a modernist block. That was a missed opportunity. I don't think this is a good way. So that's basically why I've founded Arkkitehtuurikapina. Please join, unless you already have. We are also on Twitter and in Instagram, but most active in Facebook. So I thank you very much, and please connect with me today, later, or online later on. Thank you.
So as I wait for my slides to come up, just first want to say thank you very much for the invitation. It's my first time in Helsinki, and I look forward to seeing some of the city tomorrow as I get a chance to walk around before flying back to London. In case you couldn't tell by my accent, I'm not Nordic, but I've been living in Europe since 2007 and had an opportunity to visit a number of places in Europe now. So I'm going to talk to you today about community design and beautiful streets. Let's see, is that the right button? So Create Streets is an organization that's involved quite heavily in the planning debate in England. We're London-based, but we're kind of across England. And we also have an associated charity, the Create Streets Foundation. And at our heart, we exist to make it easier to build more beautiful, high-density places that people can really love for generations. Because sort of as I've heard from my colleagues here, it sounds like you're having a housing crisis in the Nordic countries as well, and that's certainly very much true in London. There's a huge lack of housing in London particularly. In England, it's estimated on the low end that there's a need for 1 million to 4 million new houses. So we really think it's important that we build more houses, but we think it's also extremely important that we do it in a way that's beautiful. And the way we do that is kind of working from two levels. We work on the research side, doing research into what kind of houses people want, what are the root causes of planning issues and the housing crisis. But then we also work from the bottom up, almost grassroots, working with community groups and co-designing projects with local communities. We do a lot of advocacy work. We've got a video on YouTube, which you can go and see. And then here's a couple of research things that we've done over the past 10 years. And I would say that the research, it not only informs the work that we then do with our clients, but it's also really crucial into making changes at the national planning level. Because even if something seems common sense, and I think certainly among the panelists here, a lot of this does seem common sense to us, but you can't just go to a planning official or a treasury official and say, let's change this law because it's the obvious thing to do. You need research to back that up. We kind of live in this age where data is king. So we've done research from anything to from property prices, which kind of houses are more expensive, which kind of houses people are more willing to pay for, to basics like what's the best placement for a bench within a public space. And one of the key pieces of research that our director Nicholas Boyce-Smith worked on with Sir Roger Scruton was the Living with Beauty report of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, which then led on to a number of changes that are coming up into the UK planning system. In particular, something that I'm working on quite a lot, which are design codes. Design codes are a new planning policy that's being mandated now from local authorities and from private developers to kind of set standards for what's going to be accepted by local communities. And final point on the housing issue is I definitely recommend reading an article called The Housing Theory of Everything, which is on the Works in Progress website, because it touches on a lot of the topics that have come up in panels today, which is that unaffordable housing has huge knock-on effects on society, especially on young people. So issues like low birth rates, breaks on economic growth and productivity, they can all be traced back to a lack of affordable housing. So I definitely recommend reading that article. So as I said, Create Streets does a lot of work with community groups. So I'm going to go through a couple of the community projects we've done, but also with keeping in mind that I really think it's important to trust local communities. When you're in sort of the architectural world, it's very easy to lose faith and kind of assume that architects have lost their minds. And it's true that many architects, I think, have. But local people haven't, as we've seen already. When you do local polls and visual preference surveys, as we like to call them, it's almost across cultural boundaries that you see support of 75–80% for traditional architecture. So modernist architects generally do live in an echo chamber, but it's not something that's reflected among local people. So we like working with local people and having not just our preferences, but their preferences validated in the work that we do. So the first project I'll go through, this was kind of the project that put Create Streets on the map. It was called Mount Pleasant. It was a big Royal Mail site in London, which Royal Mail had wanted to redevelop. And they'd already chosen sort of their preferred developer partner. They spent tons of money and had a scheme which the local community hated. So Nicholas put together a group of architects, planning officials, basically a lot of consultants, and he was kind of finding his way when he was doing this project. But we put together a counter proposal of a development of traditional, not just traditional architecture, but traditional streets and squares. This is a sketch that Francis Terry did to show that you could have beautiful public spaces, you could have beautiful architecture that wasn't more expensive to do. This is a watercolor sketch he did. And the project had over 95% support in local polls. And at the time, Boris Johnson, who's the mayor of London at the time, also gave his support to the project and said that it was a very beautiful project. But it didn't matter. Unfortunately, this is what was built instead, because developers don't care what local people think, as I think we all know. So unfortunately, this wasn't a win, but we continue to work on other projects like this one. So this is in the far north of England, in a city called Sunderland, which is one of the most deprived cities, or it has some of the most deprived areas in England. And it's been completely decimated in terms of its urban fabric. Like a lot of cities, since the war, the town center has been completely hollowed out. People who have a bit more money have all moved out into the suburbs. So this is what those streets used to look like. It used to be actually one of the most prosperous neighborhoods in the city. But then it started getting hollowed out in the 1860s. Big houses that used to be owned by prominent local residents like lawyers and merchants and sea captains started moving out. Houses were turned into flats. Eventually they got dilapidated and the streets were demolished, as you saw. So we came in to work with a local group called the Living Arts Hub, which was a group of local artists who were looking not just for more affordable housing, but also for space where they could build their art and paint and do glassworks. A lot of them who had moved out of more expensive places like London, looking for somewhere more affordable to do that. So we ran a series of workshops with them. We brought in some of our favorite local architects, other consultants, and we worked up what kind of place they would like to see, and this was the result. So while not quite traditional in architecture, it is a traditional pattern of terrace streets, so restitching the urban fabric, essentially building the same kind of housing that was there before. And as I said, maybe not quite traditional architecture, but it is good traditional urbanism with high quality materials which reflect the local area. And this project is going well. Whether it looks exactly like this computer rendering it's still too early to tell, but we're quite hopeful. The project has funding and there's a developer partner in place that we're working with. Okay. Going to quickly kind of go through the final bit. We are called Create Streets, and that's because we believe that streets are some of the most important places in our cities, and they're some of the places that have been most hollowed out in recent years. Somewhere that used to be a place that kids would play and could even be a beautiful place, a quiet place. Suddenly, streets are now a piece of infrastructure dominated by cars and loud noises. So we think that streets should again be places that you can linger in, enjoy spending time in, and bring that vision. How did we get there? Well, post-war planning, you had a lot of architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, even Corbusier, who had these visions of segregated cities where you would have your big streets, your big buildings, and everything, employment over here, housing over there, and everything would be connected by these big fast roads. And we lost that vision of streets as public places. An example here, this is Park Lane in London. It used to be one of the most beautiful streets in London, the most expensive street in London, and now it's basically a traffic sewer. This is just close by. So how are we working on these issues? Well, Create Streets does a lot of work on things like design guides and design codes, working with local councils, local authorities. So we just completed Surrey County Council's new street design guide, which means that within Surrey, streets now have to follow traditional urbanism, and hopefully in the next couple of years, streets in Surrey will be much, much better places. This is another example. This is in Rochdale, again, another quite deprived area, not too far from Manchester. It used to be a vibrant place within Rochdale, a kind of a commercial hub. And this is what it looks like today. Post-war planning completely obliterated all the buildings and put in this big wide road. This is what it looks like now. This is what we think it will look like in a couple of years' time, essentially bringing back the buildings, putting in cycle lanes and making it tree-lined, beautiful architecture, and once again creating a real place within the city rather than just somewhere that you drive through as quickly as you possibly can. This is a project reimagining what a high street can be, making a place for pedestrians and cars to drive through slowly with a beautiful park in the middle. We believe it's important to do soft edges to make beautiful places and making places that really feel like they have character. A lot of the things you see in this rendering actually are extremely difficult to get through planning officials. Highways engineers, transport engineers are basically the sort of demons of making good places, and a lot of what you see is basically illegal, but we're going to try to do it anyway. Because we always need streets for cars, but we also need streets for people, which have texture, places that you actually want to spend time in, and that feel like they have a character in the sense of place, and places which can be for people and beauty and greenery. So thank you very much.
All right. I see the next keynote is going to get mic'd up, and that means we'll have time for a few questions. The one, I suppose, that I thought about first is all this community emphasis you have is slightly different, it seems, to what's happening in Hungary, where the government has initiated huge building projects, fixing up the city, building anew, and so on. So what is best, you think, and anyone can answer, between this top-down approach and the community approach, and do we in fact need both?
Just to introduce the issue that you brought up, in Budapest recently there is a large-scale construction work financed by public money with the aim of reconstructing buildings that were destroyed either in the Second World War or in the communist period. And it means that they can rebuild buildings which were destroyed, or build ones which were not actually executed, but the plans are there and we can build them. And so there are huge discussions because of course there are issues of cultural heritage included in this project, i.e. how to preserve what you have got and how to be honest to that tradition. Is it possible to build in the 21st century buildings which were planned earlier in an earlier century, and to do it with modern technology, with modern materials? Would that be something like cheating, or is it, as the government claims, a question of moral judgment, i.e. that if foreign power, totalitarian power destroys your cities, you have got the right, in fact the duty, to rebuild those buildings. So these are the issues involved, and I think that it's really something. actually happening all around Europe, including Germany or earlier Poland. So I think it's something that is there, and apparently people like it. So there is public support for that. But of course, the profession is against it, and at least part of the profession, and of course there is a political issue involved.
In Norway, we have building codes or laws in place that makes it possible for the municipality to regulate, so that you can build beautiful and create the sort of towns and cities that we want. But for that, it requires, I suppose, a democratic message. What's the shortest democratic sort of sloganizing you can do to really mobilize the masses to demand from the lawmakers in their local communities? Robert, go.
Well, I think it is a controversial topic, and it is one that can get politically loaded very quickly, because you don't want the kind of situation like what you found in the United States, where President Trump was working on this federal architectural mandate, which would have mandated classical architecture for large-scale government projects. I think it was federal buildings of construction value over $50 million. And it did get passed, but before it could make any kind of impact, it was one of the very, very first things that President Biden did was to reverse that executive order almost within like the first week.
That's why you need conservative governments to keep on in power.
Well, ideally, yes. But it also touches on this paradox I think Mario touched on, where it seems to be completely okay for governments to go and build tons of modernist buildings, but as soon as there's a classical building or even something vaguely traditional, suddenly it becomes very, very controversial, and especially among the architectural profession, you'll get professional organizations like the American Institute of Architects or the Royal Institute of British Architects who will come out against this kind of design and demand that it's a neutral process. Neutral, of course, always meaning what they want. So I think a top-down approach is risky. That's why with things like design codes, it's crucial that you do have the community engagement up front, so that even if the result does end up mandating some form of traditional architecture, that it's not something that feels like it's being forced onto people, but it actually is something that the people have chosen for themselves. And luckily, as I said, 75 to 80% of people, at least in England, do seem to prefer traditional architecture. And of the design code that I'm recently working on, the traditional buildings have had support up to 96%. The most modernist house had 33% support. So I think that the mandate in that case was pretty clear.
Then Mario can have a very quick one.
Yes, just a comment here. I think that what almost all boils down to is education, and the education of architects. And what I see is already happening in some other countries, maybe not in Finland yet, but there is demand by the students of architecture to have more information, more education on classical and traditional architecture, and not just only as something of the past times, something belonging to history, but languages that are alive and could solve so many problems that we have in our built environments. So education would be the key to this, and not only this mono education on modernist tradition, but also, yeah.
I would like to add on to several of these things, but first of all, a slogan.
Eric,
Sorry.
I think you can find, because you are brilliantly polemical and wonderful at explaining, but I think we should, for democratic purposes, purchase a bus and bus you about in all the Scandinavian countries where you can give speeches and arouse the public. I think that's my answer to the democratic question. But for the purposes here, I think one slogan.
Wrap it for your as a gift for your grandchildren.
Yes. Was that it? Yeah, brilliant. Very good.